One of the richest and most influential houses with unmatched strength on the seas and deep roots around the Iron Throne. We see the Velaryons a lot in HBO's House of the Dragon, as they're dragon riders like the Targaryens, but they're not in Game of Thrones. They're in the books a little more, but again, not really. So how did they go from being even richer than the Hightowers or Lannisters, with members of family very close to the crown and married into noble lines, to them being relatively pretty irrelevant? In this video, we're going to deep dive into the origins, history, and rise and fall of the Velaryons. There's also a pretty cool character who's in the books during Game of Thrones but isn't in the TV series, so stay tuned for that part near the end. House Velaryon has a coat of arms of a silver seahorse on an aquamarine background. On the TV show, the seahorse has been made to look a little more mythical than in the books, where it's just a simple seahorse. Their words don't appear in the books, but according to semi-canon sources, they are the old, the true, the brave. House Velaryon is of Valyrian descent, tongue twister there, meaning they came from Old Valyria just like the Targaryens. They moved across to Westeros before the Doom, likely because they had a better chance of being a force to be reckoned with in the West, as they weren't dragon riders back in Old Valyria, so likely weren't that powerful over there, though not too much is known about that time. The Velaryons only actually became dragon riders after Corlys Velaryon married and had children with Rhaenys Targaryen, but we're getting ahead of ourselves there. According to their family histories, the Velaryons came to Westeros before House Targaryen, settling on the island of Driftmark in the Gullet. The castle of Driftmark housed their ancient high seat, the Driftwood Throne, which according to legend had been given to them by the Merlin King to conclude a pact. But that is probably just some random myth thing. The Velaryons were the oldest and closest allies of the Targaryens for centuries. Targaryens ruled the skies with their dragons, and Velaryons ruled the seas with their naval armada. The Velaryons in the books looked quite different to the Velaryons we see in HBO's House of the Dragon. They're described in the books as having fair, pale skin, purple eyes, and silver hair, a bit like those pesky Targaryens. Whereas in the show they have dark skin and more dreadlock-like hair, still being silver or really light blonde or sometimes just black. I guess the change is so it's more visually obvious in the show who's Targaryen and who's Velaryon, which does make sense, but I do know that a lot of book purists find it quite contentious that they changed it. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. HBO omitted purple eyes for all characters, which I also kind of get, but would have looked really cool if they had their purple eyes. You know Aegon the Conqueror, the first Targaryen king who unified the Seven Kingdoms? Well, yeah, he's actually half Velaryon. Valyna Velaryon married Aerion Targaryen and gave birth to Aegon the Conqueror, Visenya, and Rhaenys. It's thought that Valyna was even half Targaryen herself, so these two families have been marrying and playing How's Your Father for ages. The Velaryons used their fleet to transport Aegon the Conqueror's men across Blackwater Bay to Aegon's Landing when he claimed and made the Iron Throne. After this, Aegon's close friend Daemon Velaryon was given the title of Master of Ships to go alongside the ancestral title of Lord of the Tides, which does sound absolutely badass, doesn't it? After this, it kind of became a bit of a hereditary thing for a Velaryon to be the Master of Ships, and it went down the family for generations, until the Targaryens eventually lost the throne just before the events in Game of Thrones. The Velaryon fleet of ships made up most of the royal fleet, so naturally I guess it makes sense that they are the Master of Ships. Imagine they gave it to someone else and then there's a Velaryon with like loads of ships going like, bruh, what about me? After a Dornish assassination attempt on the king, Corlys Velaryon, a different one to the one that we see in the show, was chosen by Queen Visenya Targaryen to be the very first Lord Commander of the Kingsguard in 10 AC, a position in which he served nobly and with honour until the end of his days. The Corlys we see in the show is named after this Corlys. Another big player in the family was Alyssa Velaryon, who married Aegon the Conqueror's son and the second Targaryen king, Aenys. She was queen herself and had 6 children with Aenys, notably Jaehaerys, who went on to become king himself. After Daemon Velaryon died, he was succeeded as Lord of the Tides by his grandson, Corlys, also known as the Sea Snake, who had risen to fame with his great voyages across the seas. He first sailed to Pentos at the young age of 6 with his uncle. According to the captains he served under, they had never seen such a natural sailor as Corlys. He became a captain himself at the age of 16. Corlys sailed aboard the Sea Snake, a ship he designed and built on 9 great voyages to Essos. He became the first man from Westeros to sail to Yeti, returning rich with spices, silks, and other treasures. He accumulated so much wealth that House Velaryon became the richest house in the realm, and himself the wealthiest man in the Seven Kingdoms. Basically, he's a cool pirate. Side note, but I reckon it would be a really cool spin-off or movie or something, just watching Corlys rule the seas. It would be sick. I think there were actually rumours of an animated series called The Nine Voyages, or something like that, that's all about Corlys' adventures, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Anyway, Corlys had had enough of the Velaryon home of Castle Driftmark, because it had grown old, damp and crowded, so he just built a new seat and home for them called Hightide. The sea snake married into the Targaryen family with Rhaenys, the queen who never was, uniting the two families once again. The Velaryons under Corlys and Rhaenys is where they arguably reached their apex. Corlys made them the wealthiest house in the realm, richer than the Lannisters or Hightowers, and Rhaenys made their offspring dragon riders. It's fair to say at this point they were probably the most powerful non-royal house in Westerosi history. Corlys and Rhaenys had two children together, Laena and Laenor, who both became dragon riders on Vhagar and Seasmoke respectively. The Velaryons, including Rhaenys, were looked over multiple times when it came to the succession of the Iron Throne. They felt like they were entitled to a claim through Rhaenys and then through Laenor, but both times were shunned and ignored. This caused the Sea Snake to temporarily fall out with their family's greatest ally until he became friends with George R.R. Martin's favourite ever Targaryen, Daemon. Yes, Matt Smith's Daemon. They went on some piratey adventures together and had a great time, and when Daemon's first wife passed away, Corlys agreed to wed him to his daughter, Laena. You just can't keep these families away from each other, can you? Corlys' son, Laenor, was also wed to Rhaenyra Targaryen, as we see on House of the Dragon. They have 3 children, supposedly, who we actually know to be bastards from a certain Mr. Strong. It turns out Laenor liked boys anyway, so he wasn't too bothered. Daemon and Laena have 2 children in Baela and Rhaena. Are you keeping up? Sadly, both of Corlys' children die soon after, one in childbirth and the other gets his head kicked in. In the show, Laenor's death is staged as he escapes to a simple life somewhere in the Free Cities, which is probably a much nicer ending for him. During the Dance of the Dragons, Corlys and his wife Rhaenys were major supporters of Rhaenyra Targaryen and the Blacks, so much so the Valyrian Seahorse was added as 1/4 of Rhaenyra's personal sigil. However, when Rhaenys passed away at the Battle of Rook's Rest against Aemon's Vhagar and Aegon's Sunfire, Corlys Velaryon was enraged that Rhaenyra had sent Rhaenys instead of going herself. Eventually they smoothed things over and Corlys became Hand of the Queen. Easy as that. But now House Velaryon has no direct heirs to carry on the name of the great family. Corlys would have to wed again to make a new heir, unless he was a naughty boy and had some bastards knocking about. When Prince Jacaerys offered the people of Dragonstone to attempt to claim a dragon to increase the number of dragon riders, Adam of Hull and his brother Alyn made their attempt. Adam was successful in claiming Seasmoke, who was Laenor's dragon before. Alyn wasn't successful, he tried to claim Sheepstealer and escaped with a few scars. It turns out Adam and Alyn were almost definitely Corlys' bastard sons who he hid away from his fiery-tempered wife. Corlys ends up officially adopting them and petitions to Rhaenyra that they get their official title of Velaryon. Hooray, the Velaryon name isn't going to die out now. Once war breaks out, Corlys and the Velaryon fleet blockade the Gullet for Rhaenyra's side, fighting the bloodiest naval battle in the story's history at the Battle of the Gullet, against the Triarchy. They lose roughly 1/3 of their ships in the process. Enemy forces sack Driftmark directly, burning Hightide and destroying Spicetown so badly that their home is never rebuilt. The seat of House Velaryon just gone. A massive blow to the Velaryons, and one that they never really fully recovered from. Now here's where we get into spoiler territory for the next season of House of the Dragon. I'll try and keep it just to House Velaryon, and not what happens overall to loads of the other characters, but just be aware. Skip to this point in the video on screen if you don't want those potential spoilers. Anyway, after the traitors Ulf and Hugh Hammer betray Rhaenyra at the Battle of Tumbleton that we've seen in the show now, although in the show it's only Ulf and not Hugh Hammer, Rhaenyra becomes pretty paranoid that the other dragon seeds might do the same. So she orders Adam to be locked up. Corlys obviously objects and tells Adam, giving him enough time to flee. However, at the second Battle of Tumbleton, Adam wanted to prove his loyalty to Rhaenyra and decided to turn up and fight for her anyway. As Corlys didn't do what Rhaenyra wanted and let Adam escape, he was arrested and consequently his men, who made up half of Rhaenyra's forces at King's Landing, began to abandon her by the hundreds. What was left of the Velaryon fleet at that time also yeeted out of there too, so the Velaryons just left. Rhaenyra really didn't help herself, did she? The Sea Snake was only let out of his dungeon imprisonment once Rhaenyra was forced to flee and Aegon returned to King's Landing. Alicent Hightower offered Corlys a full pardon if he declared his support for Aegon.
I'm alive!
He accepted, but with some terms of his own. Not too long after, Aegon was poisoned, with some pointing the finger, without proof, at our famous Corlys Velaryon. He's got a pretty good story really, hasn't he? Corlys eventually passes away at the grand age of 79 after serving as one of the most powerful regents to King Aegon III. The next Aegon, there's lots of them.
You're joking. Not another one?
Getting to 79 with the life that he had in the world of Ice and Fire is possibly the most impressive thing about him. You don't see many people living to that age in that world. Alyn and his mother transported Corlys' body back to Driftmark and buried him at sea aboard his beloved sea snake, where apparently a super scary wild dragon who ate other dragons called the Cannibal flew over in salute to the sea snake. I've got a video on the Cannibal you should check out after this one. Unlike a lot of families gutted by the dance, the Velaryons actually do recover quite nicely, for a while anyway, largely thanks to Alyn. Later known as Alyn Oakenfist, he becomes the Lord of the Tides after Corlys' death, marries Baela Targaryen, and goes on to become one of the greatest admirals in Westerosi history, breaking the power of the Stepstone's pirates, humiliating the Ironborn Red Kraken Dalton Greyjoy at sea, and earning a seat on the small council for Aegon III as Master of Ships, as well as being officially knighted by the Lord Commander. So the Velaryons are back as Master of Ships. Alyn makes 6 great voyages on his own, following directly in his father's footsteps. He once captained a ship he called the Queen Rhaenys, almost definitely named after the queen who never was. Quite a provocative name to be fair, as it could be seen as going against the crown. Alyn disappeared at sea around 175 AC, almost 100 years before Robert's Rebellion, and no one really knows what happened to him. It's worth mentioning another Velaryon who becomes queen too, none other than Corlys' granddaughter, Lady Daenerys Velaryon, who marries Aegon III as his second wife. She's the daughter of Daeron Velaryon, who's a cousin to Alyn. I know, who knew interbred families could be so confusing? Her 2 sons would become kings in their own right too, Daeron the Young Dragon and Baelor the Beloved. The 100 years after Alyn's disappearance were fairly quiet for such an influential house. However, the next Velaryon Lord of Tides and Master of Ships was Lucerys Velaryon during the reign of the Mad King, Aerys Targaryen. However, it doesn't last too long because after the events of Robert's Rebellion, Bobby B is on the throne and he grants the castle of Dragonstone, which was the Targaryen home, to his brother Stannis Baratheon. As Driftmark falls under that general area, the Velaryons, or what's left of the Velaryons, supported Stannis during the Game of Thrones TV show. Early on during the books, the head of the house is Monford Velaryon. Monford was loyal to Stannis when the Baratheon brother called his banners after declaring himself king. Monford ultimately falls in the Battle of Blackwater, leaving his 6-year-old son, Monterys, as Lord of the Tides and leader of the once great House Velaryon, a 6-year-old. Monford, however, also had a bastard half-brother called Aurane Waters, who was a pretty cool character. He was also at the Battle of Blackwater, but was taken prisoner by the Lannisters at the battle. He was handsome enough to resemble Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, so much so that Cersei Lannister takes a real personal interest in him. I wonder why. Later, Cersei, as Queen Regent, names Aurane her new Master of Ships. But when Cersei is imprisoned by the Faith Militant, Aurane just takes the entire new royal fleet out to sea and vanishes, probably planning to set himself up as a pirate lord in the Stepstones. Which, as a series of events, is pretty hilarious. It's almost Captain Jack Sparrow-esque. None of this makes it into Game of Thrones at all. The show's Battle of Blackwater is almost told entirely through Tyrion and the Lannisters' point of view, and in my opinion is actually one of the best episodes of Game of Thrones history, so maybe they were right to simplify it all, even if it does cut out our very good friends, the Velaryons. So there we have it. If you made it this far, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. It helps out me and the channel more than you could know. House Velaryon, the seahorses, the sea snake, the tale of an old family intertwined with the powerful Targaryen dragon riders, married into the royal line countless times, lords of the tide, master of ships, ruling over the seas for centuries, all the way down to just having a 6-year-old boy and a bastard pirate. What a fascinating story about a fascinating house in the world of Ice and Fire.